Good afternoon, Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com here with you, and a Hurricane HD Hurricane for iPhone and Hurricane Express video update. Obviously the big story, Hurricane Rina. I want to point out a couple things to you. Fairly clear eye now right in the middle, almost in the middle of this central dense overcast here. A CDO, just a nice round ball of convection. When you see that, you know you have a fairly well organized hurricane. The outflow established here, the wind coming out in a clockwise fashion around the hurricane, also fairly well established. For folks along the Yucatan, especially up here in the northeast corner, you need to be preparing now for a possible Category 3 hurricane landfall. Your weather will start to deteriorate. Right now, just a beautiful veil of cirrus clouds coming over your area. That will change as the outer bands come in. For those of you that live in the Yucatan and you're experienced with hurricanes, you know what's coming. An eventual increase in rough surf, very large waves, battering waves, an increase in wind and rain as the hurricane gets closer. You notice too still decent upward motion with these cloud bands out here near the Cayman Islands, as very large amounts of air ascending or lifting to give this hurricane the punch that it needs. Some dry air trying to work its way into the hurricane right here, but fairly well protected in that central dense overcast region. The core of the hurricane shielded from some very hostile dry air conditions. Looking at the afternoon model runs, what we call the very simple hurricane models, mainly I'm looking at the SHIPS model right here, the Statistical Hurricane Intensity Prediction Scheme. 90 knots is what it was initialized, about 105 miles per hour. 12 hours out, we see it increasing to 96 knots, 97 knots at 24 hours, 36 hours, 95 knots, and then finally 90 knots near a possible landfall along the Yucatan. But this right here really has my attention. 75 knots is what SHIPS is showing at 72 hours out, and I'm going to show you why that's important. 75 knots, 72 hours out. Then it does decay down to 57 knots, and then eventually below tropical storm force or very close to it by day 5. Alright, the HWRF model kind of showing us what might happen with this. The global model is hopefully giving us the best overall dynamic forecast track. The Euro, the GFS. Weirdly, the Euro dissolves it again over the next couple of days. The GFS holds on to it. We're going to look at that in a moment. Here is the HWRF model, curving it around towards South Florida, where there is increasing potential now for at least tropical storm conditions. Don't want to speculate beyond that. We'll leave that up to the Hurricane Center and the folks there to interpolate what's going on with the data and make the decisions based on what they know. Do see the heat content very high. All of these reds and yellows and oranges in here denotes very high heat content. Rina right now about in this location over some of the warmest water in the Atlantic Basin, and even the blues up here west of the Florida Keys. Not a lot of high heat content, but those water temperatures up here are in the lower to mid 80s, make no mistake about it. But where Rina is located now, very high ocean heat content, providing a lot of fuel for the hurricane and allowing it to protect itself to some extent, perhaps from that dry air. Looking at the GFS particularly, this is the 12Z run, what we call the morning run of the GFS. This is valid 24 hours from this morning, so this is tomorrow morning. You see Hurricane Rina right there in the Northwest Caribbean Sea. If we go out to 48 hours, it comes close. Not sure if it actually is able to make landfall along the Yucatan or not. The resolution not what it needs to be able to zoom in tight. Nonetheless, a very close call coming up, if not a landfall in the Yucatan. Finally, at 72 hours, and remember what I was talking about with the SHIPS model, look how close it's coming to South Florida here, not too far off the Keys. SHIPS model indicating 75 knots at this very time frame, 72 hours out. That's an 85 mile per hour hurricane, folks, not more than 100 miles or so offshore of Florida, if that. Very important to see what happens here. This is a major model run, the 12Z run, considered one of the more robust runs of the day, and it'll be interesting to see what the Hurricane Center shows on their next update. Also at that time frame, the hurricane will be located, assuming it still is one, right here, and that is a 20-knot wind barb showing almost southwest winds at about 20 knots. The hurricane would also be, assuming it is still one, moving in that direction, and let's say it's moving at 10 miles per hour. Let's just take a guess. And it's got 20 knots of shear, or 20 miles per hour of shear, make them all the same. Well, then that's just a relative shear value of only about 10 miles per hour. Bottom line, this does not show me that there is very, very strong destructive shear near Rina. That is all up here in this region. Right there where the tropical cyclone would be, perhaps just enough of a favorable environment to allow it to come in and affect South Florida, possibly as a hurricane. It cannot be ruled out. Finally, at 84 hours out, it makes landfall on the GFS model anyway in extreme southern Florida, and finally there at 96 hours it's off the coast. The GFS now showing a landfall. How strong it might be, what it really will turn out to be, we'll have to wait and see what happens. Very interested to see what the National Hurricane Center says on their 5 p.m. advisory with the official forecast. This is just to give you an idea of what the models are showing and what's going on with Rina in its current state. I am Mark Sudduth. I'll have more video updates for you over the coming days.